The city of Cordoba sprawled before you like a diseased beast, its crumbling architecture a testament to the transience of human endeavor. You navigated the narrow streets, weaving past vendors and pedestrians, the cacophony of horns and chatter, a constant reminder of the city's unbridled energy. Your name is Mateo, a young man with a talent for getting in over his head and a penchant for finding trouble in most unlikely of places. You'd grown up on the outskirts of Cordoba, in a neighborhood that seemed to exist in a state of perpetual twilight. The houses were old, their walls cracked and worn, but they'd been your home for as long as you could remember. Your father, a former boxer, had passed away when you were just a boy, leaving your mother to raise you and your younger sister on her own. She worked multiple jobs to make ends meet, but it was never enough. You'd always felt like you were living on the edge, like one wrong move could send everything crashing down. And yet, you'd always been drawn to the city like a moth to a flame. There was something about the chaos, the unpredictability of it all, that seemed to speak to you on a deep level. You've been working as a mechanic for a few years now, trying to make a name for yourself in the city's tight-knit community of car enthusiasts. It wasn't a bad life, but it was far from the one you dreamed of. You'd always wanted to be a fighter, to lace up the gloves and step into the ring like your father before you. But that was a fantasy, one that you'd long since relegated to the realm of the impossible. Instead, you focused on your work, trying to build a reputation as one of the best mechanics in the city. It was a quiet life, but it was one that you'd grown accustomed to. As you walked through the streets, the sounds and smells of the city assaulting your senses, you couldn't help but feel a sense of restlessness. It was as if you were waiting for something that would shake the foundations of your life and set you on a new path. You didn't know what it was, or when it would come, but you knew it would be soon. The city had a way of getting under your skin, of making you feel like you were something bigger than yourself, and you were ready to see what it had in store for you. You worked at a small garage on the outskirts of the city, a place that was more like a family than a business. The owner, a gruff but lovable man named Carlos, had taken you under his wing when you were just a teenager. He'd taught you everything he knew, from the basics of engine repair to the intricacies of high-performance tuning. You'd worked your way up to become one of the top mechanics in the shop, and you took pride in your work. There was something satisfying about getting your hands dirty, about knowing that you'd help someone fix their car and get back on the road. But despite the sense of satisfaction you got from your work, you couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. You felt like you were stuck in a rut, like you were going through the motions, without any real sense of purpose. You tried to talk to Carlos about it, but he just told you to focus on your work and everything would fall into place. It wasn't advice that you disagreed with, but it wasn't exactly what you wanted to hear either. You felt like you were ready for a change, like you were ready to take on the world and see what it had in store for you. As you worked on a particularly tricky engine, you couldn't help but feel a sense of frustration. You knew that you were capable of more, that you had a lot to offer, but it seemed like nobody else saw it, like nobody else was willing to give you a chance. You felt like you were stuck in a never-ending cycle of mediocrity, like you were just going through the motions without any real sense of direction. It was then that you saw her, a beautiful young woman with piercing green eyes and long, dark hair. She was standing across the street, looking at you with a mixture of curiosity and concern. You felt a jolt of electricity run through your body as you met her gaze, and you knew in that moment that your life was about to change in ways that you couldn't even begin to imagine. Her name was Sophia, and she was a journalist with a passion for telling the stories that nobody else wanted to hear. She'd been investigating a string of mysterious occurrences in the city, things that seemed to defy explanation and push the boundaries of what was possible. and she'd come to the garage, looking for answers, looking for someone who could help her make sense of it all. You were immediately drawn to her, to the fire that burned in her eyes, and the determination that radiated from her very being. You felt like you were looking at a kindred spirit, someone who understood the city in a way that you did, and you knew that you wanted to help her, to be her investigation and see where it would lead. As you talked to her, you couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement. This was it, the moment you'd been waiting for, the moment that would change everything. You felt like you were on the cusp of something big, something that would shake the foundations of your life and set you on a new path. But as the conversation went on, you began to realize that Sophia was more than just a journalist. She was a woman with a mission, a woman who was willing to risk everything to get to the truth. And you knew that you were in over your head, that you were in way over your depth. But you also knew that you couldn't turn back now, that you had to see this through to the end. You spent the next few days working with Sophia, trying to help her uncover the truth behind the mysterious occurrences. You scoured the city, talking to people and gathering information, trying to piece together the puzzle. And as you worked, you began to realize that this was more than just a story. This was a conspiracy, a web of deceit and corruption that went all the way to the top. You felt a sense of fear as you delved deeper into the story, fear that you were in over your head and that you would be the one to pay the price. But you also felt a sense of excitement, a sense that you were on the cusp of something big, something that would change everything. As you continued to investigate, you began to realize that Sophia was not what she seemed. She was not just a journalist, but a woman with a hidden past, a woman who was willing to do whatever it took to get the truth. And you knew that you were in danger, that you were playing with fire, but you also knew that you couldn't turn back now. You had to see this through to the end, no matter what the cost. And as you delved deeper into the story, you began to realize that the truth was far more sinister than you could have ever imagined. The city was a different place at night, a place of shadows and secrets. You and Sophia had been working for hours, trying to uncover the truth behind the conspiracy. And as you walked through the dark streets, you couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. You knew that you were being watched, that you were being followed. You saw the first sign of trouble when you were ambushed by a group of thugs. They were rough and brutal, and you knew that you were in danger. But you also knew that you couldn't back down, that you had to see this through to the end. As you fought off the thugs, you realized that this was more than just a simple attack. This was a warning, a message from the people who were behind the conspiracy. And you knew that you had to be careful, that you had to watch your back. But you also knew that you couldn't give up. You had to see this through to the end, no matter what the cost. And as you continued to investigate, you began to realize that the truth was far more complex than you could have ever imagined. The final confrontation was intense, a clash of wills between you and the people who were behind the conspiracy. You fought hard, using every trick in the book to try and uncover the truth. And in the end, it was just you and the leader of the conspiracy, a man who was willing to do whatever it took to keep the truth hidden. You faced off against him, your fists clenched and your heart pounding. And as you looked into his eyes, you knew that you had to be careful. This was a man who was willing to do whatever it took to keep the truth hidden, and you knew that you were in danger. But you also knew that you couldn't back down. You had to see this through to the end, no matter what the cost. And as you fought, you realized that this was more than just a simple confrontation. This was a battle for the truth, a battle for the city itself. In the end, it was just you and the leader of the conspiracy locked in a struggle that would determine the fate of the city. And as you fought, you knew that you had to be careful. This was a man who was willing to do whatever it took to keep the truth hidden, and you knew that you were in danger. But you also knew that you couldn't back down. You had to see this through to the end, no matter what the cost. And as you fought, you realized that this was more than just a simple confrontation. This was a battle for the truth, a battle for the city itself. In the end, it was you who emerged, victorious, the leader of the conspiracy defeated, and the truth finally revealed. And as you stood there, victorious but shaken, you knew that your life would never be the same. You had faced the darkness, and you had come out on top. But you also knew that the city would never be the same, that the truth would change everything. And as you walked away from the scene, you felt a sense of pride and accomplishment. You had faced the unknown, and you had come out on top. And you knew that you would always be ready for whatever the city threw your way.